They do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Curry, way downtown. Bang! Bang! Oh, what a shot from Curry!
What's up, everyone? My name is Ethan. This is Courtside TV. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and let's get into it. So, I wanted to talk today about a team that I feel like people are kind of forgetting about. It's kind of weird because they didn't have a super eventful offseason. This is a pretty similar team to last year for the Utah Jazz. They're kind of just running it back, whereas a lot of the other teams in the Western Conference have made some pretty big moves over the last couple of months and getting ready for next season. And it's tough to kind of project where the Jazz sit in the power rankings here because if you're looking at the West, right, there's not really any playoff locks outside of a few teams. You can say probably the Lakers, Clippers, and the Nuggets are generally most people consider to be, okay, these teams are definitely going to make the playoffs, assuming that they stay healthy. They're going to be, some of the top seeds here. And then you have this next group of teams that are going to be like fighting for playoff spots and playoff positionings because, the West is just so tough. Pretty much every team out there is at least trying to be good. And with the added play-in tournament, it's just such a deep conference. And so, like, Mavericks, Blazers, Warriors, and like the Timberwolves in there, and like a bunch of other teams, right? The Suns, you could go on. And so you're trying to figure out kind of where the Jazz lie here. Are they like one of these playoff locks? Are they a little bit better than, some of those other teams? Or are they just in that mix? And are they in danger of falling out of the postseason because the conference has gotten so good around them and they, didn't really make that many moves to get that much better, right? But they still had a really good team last year, and they, in the first round, they were just inches away from knocking off the Denver Nuggets. They were up 3-1, had that collapse, but Mike Conley had a shot, very last-second shot that almost went in. He was a little bit long, and if that shot had gone down, it's the Jazz playing in the second round against the Clippers rather than Denver, and, that changes how we view the Nuggets going into next year, changes how we view the Jazz, right? Maybe if the Clippers had won, it changes that. Maybe Doc Rivers keeps his job. They were talking about this on Zach Lowe's podcast this week, how that's a big sliding doors moment for the NBA because if Conley makes that shot, a lot of things could have been different this offseason. So I think for the Jazz, a lot of people are kind of just forgetting about them because they get written off as a first round loss, right? They're like, oh, this team lost in the first round, they're not going to be that good. Whereas in reality, they were really, really close to being a second round team, and going against the Clippers, who knows, right? The Clippers kind of collapsed there. Maybe the Jazz wouldn't have been able to capitalize as much as the Nuggets did, but like I said, who knows? So what did the Jazz do, and what kind of moves have they made? Well, I think the biggest thing for them is honestly getting Bojan Bogdanovic back from injury. Bogdanovic was probably their most consistent offensive player last year. Yes, he's not as good of a player as Donovan Mitchell or Rudy Gobert, but just in his role and, playing the way that he was in his kind of, not even really like sixth man, because I guess he started, but just like complimentary scorer, guy who was really steady, always going to hit shots. He had a couple game winners. He was hitting the big shot every time, whereas Mitchell kind of struggled with consistency at points, and Gobert is not really an offensive threat. Mike Conley, as we know, had an up and down season, and so Bogdanovic was really like a very solid presence for them, just a steady veteran who was able to come in and get you buckets when you needed them, right? And him being out in the playoffs was a really big blow for them because they had to rely more on guys like Jordan Clarkson. Obviously, Mitchell had that explosion of a series in the first round. He scored over 50 points, I think, multiple times, and was just crazy going, and it was kind of like Mitchell or bust, right? If he wasn't able to score a ton and get you over the hump, then they were really, really going to struggle. And so getting Bogdanovic back is going to be a huge help for them, just in their terms of offensive consistency, because they really struggled without him. And then they re-signed Jordan Clarkson. Yes, it's probably a bit of an overpay, but he was really good for them last year. He's got a 4-year deal now at about $12 to $13 million per season, which, like I said, that's a little bit much for him. But when you're looking at it, really, they kind of didn't have that many other options. Utah's not a free agency destination. They kind of want to retain their guys, and him coming in as a sixth man off the bench, even inefficient at times with his suspect defense and stuff like that, the team was able to make up for his faults, and they were able to kind of mask his deficiencies there. So I don't mind the Clarkson signing, even though a lot of people were like, whoa, that's a lot of money for Jordan Clarkson. And then they also brought back Derrick Favors, who the Jazz and Derrick Favors can never break it up, man. They keep getting so close. It's like, oh, he's going to leave in free agency. Just kidding, he re-signed. Oh, they traded him to the Pelicans. Just kidding, he's back. They just, apparently, Favors loves the Jazz love Favors. I don't mind this one either. He's a nice backup center for Gobert. When Gobert's off the court for however many minutes, they can even play together, but when Gobert's off the court for, his 15, 16 minutes of rest per game, Favors can come in. He's still, pretty good defensively, doesn't leave the Jazz with as much of a gaping hole at center as they kind of had last year, because Ed Davis was pretty inconsistent in terms of his health. When he was on the court, he wasn't amazing, and so, yeah, he missed a lot of time, and Tony Bradley was just not very good. I watched a lot of Tony Bradley because, if you guys don't know, I actually live in Utah, and so I had, gone to a couple summer league sessions where the Jazz have that big summer league and seen a lot of Tony Bradley, and every time I see him play, I'm like, this guy doesn't know what the heck he's doing. I've never thought he was a very good basketball player, but that's kind of besides the point. And then obviously signing Donovan Mitchell to that max contract extension makes sense. And then you're looking at it, right? Well, can Mike Conley be the guy that he was with the Grizzlies, right? He was really inconsistent last year, had points where he looked really good, and then a lot of points where he was like, oh man, this guy is totally washed. I think we'll see, a more motivated version of Mike Conley. He's coming into a contract year. He's had another year in the system with the Jazz. This team is, kind of more catering to him now. I feel like he's going to have a lot more consistent of a year just with everything that's gone on between him and the franchise. I think it's finally time for him to kind of prove it that he is worth all the money that they're paying him and worth maybe extending next offseason. So I think we're going to see a better year from Mike Conley than we did last season. And then like Joe Ingles is still there, right? He's a good veteran presence. You have Royce O'Neal. This team still kind of struggles with depth a little bit, right? You have the starters, and then like Clarkson and Ingles off the bench, and that's really it. I guess Derrick Favors is another depth piece, but you kind of are going to need some more guys to really round out this rotation. That's one of my main concerns, because if you're looking at the depth chart, what do we have? Conley, Gobert, Bogdanovich, Clarkson, Ingles, Favors, O'Neal, and Mitchell. That's 8 players, which is good enough for a playoff rotation, but to get you through the regular season, that's kind of struggling there in terms of depth. And then I do want to also talk about how next offseason is a pretty pivotal point for them. And maybe they get this resolved, before then. But Mike Conley, as I said, is coming up for an extension, as is Rudy Gobert. And he will be eligible for the Supermax contract. If we're just looking at it at face value, Rudy Gobert is not worth the Supermax. There's not that many players that are. We've seen it be really detrimental to a lot of teams. Like, Russell Westbrook was almost untradeable because of that Supermax that he's on. Same deal with John Wall, and even Chris Paul, who wasn't on the Supermax, but huge money. A lot of these big stars can really only be traded for another guy on the Supermax deal, so you can't really get off that money once you commit it to it, right? Because if you're trading away a Supermax guy, you're just getting another one back in return. And so a lot of these guys haven't really been worth the money that they've been signed to, and Gobert isn't even really on the level of a lot of those other guys. His offensive impact is not amazing. Yes, he's great defensively, but there are some shortcomings with, teams being able to scheme against him in the playoffs and stuff like that. So Gobert, as good as he is, I don't think he's worth that Supermax money, and I think he knows that, and the Jazz do as well. I think he'll be hoping for a lot, but really the feeling that I get from them and around the league is that they're not going to be paying him that much. It's just, they might offer him max money, not super max. We'll have to see if they work out an extension before the season, but if not, we could potentially see some Gobert trade rumors popping up around the deadline, and maybe as we move forward here, if we get rumors that he's unhappy. It's been pretty quiet out of them. We haven't heard much about Gobert and the status of his extension, so we'll just have to see what that does. So this is a pretty big year for him and for the team, deciding just how much money they want to commit to him, and that's going to be kind of a big topic for them as we go throughout the season, because if things don't work out, they could end up just losing him next offseason for nothing, similar to the Kemba Walker thing with the Hornets, where they didn't want to pay him the Supermax money, and he just decided, okay, then I'll go somewhere else if you guys are willing to go, to that max number. and they were just said they just weren't willing to pony up the money that it was going to take to keep Kemba, even if he probably wasn't worth it. Instead, you lose him for nothing rather than trading him before. So we could see a weird situation between the Jazz and Gobert, and that is another concern going into next year, potentially having to deal one of the stars of the franchise. So how good are the Jazz going to be? Well, it's kind of tough to predict, right? Because like I said, we have the Lakers, Clippers, and Nuggets, who I consider to be postseason locks pretty much. I think those three teams are definitely going to be in a playoff position going into next year. And then I kind of have the Jazz in that next tier down with, if you're looking at it, teams like the Mavericks, the Blazers, the Warriors, and the Suns, I think are probably a little bit better than like fringe playoff team. I think if I had, is that 5, right? Those 3 that I already said, and then Jazz, Mavericks, Suns, Warriors, Blazers, I think are probably the next 5 best teams in the league. And then you have some other teams like the Grizzlies, Spurs, Kings, Pelicans, Wolves, who are going to be competing for that 9th and 10th play-in spots. This is all fluid. I haven't really made my official playoff predictions yet, but I think the Jazz are probably within that next group of, they're probably going to make the playoffs unless something catastrophic happens. So that's really where I would project them, pending a potential Gobert trade, which I don't necessarily think is going to happen at this point. It also depends on how much Donovan Mitchell can make a leap in his final year of his rookie contract, his 4th season in the NBA. Mitchell really impressed me during that playoff run. I thought that previously early in his career he had struggles with inconsistencies and kind of shooting a lot of shots and not a lot of them going in. But I think he's improved that aspect of his game, become a more well-rounded player. So I really like Mitchell going forward, and I think he's probably going to take another step. So the Jazz, as much as they've been forgotten, I think they're still, one of the better teams in the Western Conference. Not really a finals contender in my opinion, but I think they are pretty good. And I think getting Bogdanovich back will really be the biggest help for them going into next season. So that's about all I got for you today on the Utah Jazz. Like I said at the top of the video, if you're new, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, ring the bell if you want to, leave a comment letting me know what you guys think about the Jazz, their offseason, what they've done over the last month or so in order to put this team in a better position. What does this lineup look like now with Bogdanovich back? I think they're probably, they might, surprise some people, because I've seen a lot of people kind of counting them out and just kind of really forgetting about the Jazz. But they're going to be a pretty solid team. And with all that said, I will see you guys in the next one.